How are we doing, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and today we're going to be updating our rookie running back rankings for the draft class of the 2022 season here. We had the NFL Combine last week. Things ended up on Sunday, and now these rankings have changed quite a bit for me with the new information that we have with 40 times in some of the testing numbers that these players have provided us with, in addition to using the info we already had, using the film and tape that we had on these players to kind of assess skill sets and whatnot, and again, update these rankings. So one announcement I want to make before we get into today's episode is that I'll be beginning to do Dynasty rookie mock drafts here on the SFS channel. So if that's something that you want to be a part of, that's something that I would love to have happen. If you want to have access to the invite links to those mock drafts that I'll be doing, they'll be offline, recorded, and then edited up and posted here onto this YouTube channel. You just got to go down into the description of today's episode and join the community Discord server. It's a free service. And again, that link is down there. We'd love to have you guys join the community, chat in that Discord server, and then again, join those mock drafts. We'll be doing Dynasty startup mock drafts, rookie mock drafts, and even some redraft leagues this offseason as well. So go partake in that stuff. Join the SFS community. And if you're new around here, of course, always drop down and click that subscribe button and turn the bell on so you're never late for an episode. But with that being said, let's not waste any time and get into my top running back in this year's class. All right, I apologize. I just realized at the end of that intro that the green screen looked like it was kind of wigging out a little bit in the left corner, but hopefully that issue is fixed now. Our top running back for the rookie class of 2022 is absolutely, no question, Breece Hall. And this was our player we had the number one position for essentially the entire offseason. We've known for quite some time that it looked like, even heading back into last season, that Breece Hall was going to be the top guy in this year's draft class. He just possesses all the skills you look for in a number one RB. Now, this isn't necessarily a transcendent talent. We're not assessing Breece Hall like we would have a Saquon Barkley back in that 2018 draft class. But this is a player that brings all the tools to the table and checks off the most boxes by far of anyone in this draft class. You're getting a 6'1", 220-pound running back who ran a 4.39 40-yard dash, so he can cook. And on tape, I didn't think he possessed that type of speed. We saw him break away from the defense and obviously make a handful of plays for himself. You don't become the RB1 in a draft class for no reason. Obviously, he's got production and some really solid film to back that up. But the testing numbers convinced me even further. And when you're looking at a player like Breece Hall, that's a really solid pass catcher, someone that's smooth, has patient running styles as well, and can really put that together and form a complete NFL game, I have no question in my mind that Breece Hall will be the first running back drafted on draft day. Whether he's a late day one pick, I'd be rather surprised though if he was a first round pick, or what I find to be the more likely scenario is that he comes off the board right away in round two, and again is the running back with the highest amount of draft capital invested into him. So you've got the workhorse frame, you've got the skill set, you've got the speed and athletic measurables there with that 4.39 40. I think Breece Hall has a shot to be a very, very valuable draft pick here in the top of the first round of our Dynasty drafts, and obviously having him as my number one overall player in the rookie class at the running back position here. So moving into our next player, Kenneth Walker III out of Michigan State remains my RB2. It's later on in the list here that you're going to see a lot of those changes that were made to basically numbers 4 through 10. The list were changed drastically, so I'll try not to spend too much time, but obviously with these being the most valuable players on the list, we still want to cover them to an extent. Kenneth Walker's my number 2 running back. You've got yourself a 5'9", 211-pound running back with 4.38 speed, so just a hair faster than Breece Hall. And again, as I stated, Breece Hall exceeded my expectations for himself in the 40-yard dash. I expected Kenneth Walker to be a sizable amount faster than Breece Hall just because of what I saw on tape. The one-cut explosiveness out of Kenneth Walker. You look back to that game against Michigan, and he was absolutely dominant, and he was just finding the hole and then turning it up and accelerating and creating huge plays and having a massive impact in that performance. And that's what he did all season. He's a one-cut back, like I said. This isn't someone who wants to put his shoulder pads down all that much. He's going to find a lane, whether that's creating his own hole or finding a hole off script, or if he is running the design play art, This is a really explosive player and someone that you can get really excited about. If he finds himself in a good situation, I expect Walker to have really nice draft capital. And I think that, you see things kind of going in order here. I would expect him to be the number 2, at the very least, the number 3 running back selected in this year's draft class. I could see a team taking our next player on the board here ahead of Kenneth Walker, depending on fit with their scheme and whatnot. But I think that Kenneth Walker checks the most boxes in terms of having the nice athletic profile, being a player who walks into the draft not having to have stayed in college for the maximum amount of years of eligibility. Kenneth Walker is someone that I think you can feel fairly confident with drafting in your dynasty leagues. Isaiah Spiller, as I touched on, is someone here at 6'1", 225 that I could see potentially being drafted in the actual NFL draft ahead of Kenneth Walker. Now, I do like Kenneth Walker's skill set a bit more for fantasy purposes because I think he's actually more of a truly explosive, and I don't want to say he's an elite RB prospect because I don't believe that's the case. However, I do think he does have a better shot at being a productive running threat than Isaiah Spiller does. Really, the main reason that I like Isaiah Spiller as a prospect is because of the receiving side of the ball. You're getting yourself a larger running back in stature and frame, again, at that 6'1" height that can catch the football out of the backfield. As a rusher, I find him more of an average threat. I don't think he's overly physically imposing. In terms of what I've seen on tape from him, he's not just barreling defenders over. Now, he does keep his legs churning and fight for extra yardage, and he is relatively elusive, but he's not someone that is overly competent at one skill or another, whereas Kenneth Walker isn't someone that I would chalk up to being an elite receiving prospect, but I do see him having elite one-cut bursts in the open field, and that's not something that I've seen all that much with Isaiah Spiller. So I'm not overly excited about Spiller as a prospect. I would say as a whole, this running back class is a little bit weaker than or quite a bit weaker for that matter than the 2020 class per se, in terms of having guys like Jonathan Taylor to Cam Akers, J.K. Dobbins, DeAndre Swift, all those names that became lead backs. And we expect to have fruitful and productive careers. And to this point, a lot of those guys have already cashed in on that success. I think that the lower stages of this year's class are not quite as deep. However, there are still things to like. And again, Isaiah Spiller's receiving value does bring forth a decent amount of quality to the table. Brian Robinson Jr., I forgot to put that little tag on the end there, is someone who has really risen up my board here post NFL Combine. I think his testing numbers combined with his size are something that give me a lot of confidence in him. Now, one of the knocks on Brian Robinson is the fact that he had to stay in college for as long as he did. He wasn't someone that was able to enter the NFL draft in his junior season or his redshirt sophomore year to come out as after his third official year of college football. He was someone that had to stay a little bit longer. But I don't think we can knock him too heavily for that because of the fact that he was in a very talented Alabama backfield. You talk about some of the names that have been in that program and in that system while Brian Robinson was in the fold there, between having Josh Jacobs to Damian Harris and most recently Najee Harris, who had to stay there late as well because of the fact that there's so much competition in that room. So I'm not going to be overly harsh on the fact that Brian Robinson didn't have a super early breakout age. I think that's something that's fairly respectable to put into context here because of that situation. Again, playing for such a prestigious program with so much talent. I mean, you talk about guys in that program at Alabama at all positions that are having to wait for their opportunity to play on the big stage and the big platform. So at 6'1", 225, the fact that he ran a 4.53 40-yard dash shows me quite a bit more speed than I thought he had. He actually tested faster than some running backs I thought on film looked faster than Brian Robinson did. However, I love the potential of having an absolute dump truck human being at 225 pounds combined with 4.5 speed, which isn't absolute burners. Obviously, that would be somewhere in the 4.3, 4.4 category. However, I do think it is a very respectable margin here. So getting him here, I expect that Brian Robinson's draft capital will start to be somewhere around the middle to late third round. Maybe he slips into the fourth round depending on how teams value him. But obviously, after draft day is when we're going to have a more solidified ranking system here in terms of what draft capital was invested into what players, and then we can start to kind of go forward from there. Tyler Allgeier here is my number 5 running back out of BYU. Allgeier is someone who has a rather interesting story when you talk about the fact that In his sophomore year of college, he played the linebacker position. So this isn't a 4-year running back. This is someone that did have to stay until his senior year of eligibility. However, I do think that there are some pros here. The fact that he played linebacker tells me he's not afraid to be a physical athlete. And also having the experience of played things from the other side of the ball, he knows how defenses are reading the gap schemes that the offense is running, and he understands what the thought process is of those linebackers that he's up against and ultimately trying to break tackles and elude from. So I do think that there's some strengths here, some pros to the fact that he isn't a 4-year running back, the fact that he gained experience from playing on the other side of the football. At 5'11", 220, he does show me that he is a thick build. Obviously, if you're going to play linebacker, you can't be puny, especially at a college level of BYU. And I think that physicality is going to prove to be very valuable at the next level. You talk about a player who can put his shoulder down, who can churn for extra yardage. He is relatively elusive as well. On tape, he did have a lot of instances that I saw where I was rather impressed with his ability to make the defender miss. At 4'6" with his 40, though, he's not someone that's a burner. The reason he falls behind someone like a Brian Robinson, of course, is simply because of the fact that he's a little bit smaller than Brian Robinson and still ran a 40-yard dash that was a bit slower than Robinson. So overall, though, if Allgeier has a third-round draft capital investment into him by an NFL team, I would feel fairly confident about him. But we'll see how the NFL truly values this RB class with how we see different names fall into the third, fourth, and eventually, obviously, you're going to have guys fall in the fifth round that still end up being productive inevitably. But in our fantasy evaluation here, especially for Dynasty leagues, that's going to have a big impact on how we value players in our drafts here this offseason. Rachaad White's someone who moved up slightly for me to the number 6 position here at 6'2". He actually measured at the combine at 6 foot 1/2 inch. 210 pounds. I love Rachaad White's build. I was very impressed with his 4.48 40-yard dash. So that's what you kind of see on film. Rachaad White is a bigger running back who has the frame that you would expect to be able to be a physically imposing running back and someone that can put his shoulder down. However, the knock on him is that he doesn't do that maybe as often as he should because he's frequently bouncing plays off tackle. For instance, let's say the team wants to run inside zone. Sometimes you'll see Rachaad White kind of cut that play back and bounce things outside when he probably could put his shoulder down, get down and dirty into the trenches and pick up some yardage in that fashion. You're seeing Rachaad White again bounce those plays outside and not use his physical gifts to his obviously best of his ability. So that's something you hope that he can be coached into here. The fact that he's not doing that is a little bit concerning. It brings about questions to his willingness to play a physical brand of football when clearly, again, I'll say it for the 100th time, I think he has the frame to be that type of a player. So if he can incorporate that style into his game, I think you've got a lot of potential here. 4.48 is a nice 40-yard dash. However, if you're going to be bouncing plays off tackle, it's going to drive your coaches crazy. And if there's yards to be had up the gut, that's going to be an issue to him getting on the field because that, again, is going to drive a coach completely nuts if there's a lane and he tries to basically go out of the structure of the play and do his own thing. So I think there's a lot of athletic intangibles here and a lot of stuff that you can't teach that Rachaad White possesses. It's going to be a matter of incorporating and improving his skill set and utilizing more of his tools at the next level. That could impact his draft stock as well, and maybe someone who should be a third or a fourth round pick falls to the fifth round or maybe even the sixth round because of a lack of willingness to do that dirty work inside. Zamir White's another riser for me here up to the number 7 position. I have moved him ahead of James Cook, his backfield mate at Georgia. And we'll talk about James Cook in a second here, the reasons I have for concern, but there are a lot of reasons to love James Cook as well. I'm just not going to be quite as high on him as some others out there might be. But Zamir White, the fact that he ran a 4.4 40-yard dash and tested at a faster time than the smaller and player that you would expect to be the more explosive player, James Cook, at that 4.42 time. Now, again, a 0.02 time difference is not the end of the world. It's not something that shows that Zamir White would absolutely smoke James Cook in a track race. However, when you have a player the size of Zamir White, who is clearly a much larger human being and was the power back in that thunder and lightning style 1-2 punch that Georgia had this season, I think that shows a lot of potential for Zamir White's ability to be maybe an RB2 at the next level if he gets an opportunity to get on the field and produce. Now, the issue that you're going to see with a lot of these players is that the draft capital invested into them isn't going to be obviously first round capital or even high second round capital, because again, like we talked about with Breece Hall, he could be the first running back going off the board in the early second round. So even last year that we looked at as a weaker RB class, you still had Etienne and Najee Harris as first round picks that had that capital that were expected to be day one contributors. That might not be the expectation or the case for a lot of names on the list. So while I could really like the tools and traits that Zamir brings to the table, the draft capital might not necessarily meet up with that. And you're starting to talk about players here as we get down into the lower levels of this list that have to have an injury in order at the position to the starter to have them step up and be able to show the tools and skills that they have and put that talent on display. So essentially the point I'm making there is that Zamir White might not get an instant opportunity to show what he can do. However, that 4.4 speed and the size he possesses are something I find very encouraging. And again, that stock rose with the fact that he was able to run that 4.4 40-yard dash. So he's bigger, he's stronger, on tape has shown a greater ability than James Cook to break tackles and to create more opportunities for yardage. So that's where we're going there with Zamir White at number 7. At number 8, I've got Jerome Ford, the running back for the Cincinnati Bearcats. Obviously a really, really good football team this year, made the college football playoffs. The intriguing thing for Jerome Ford here is the fact that he is a transfer from Alabama. So you do have the fact that you're dealing with a player here that had the pedigree at the high school level to get recruited by the number one college football program. And obviously, as we talked about with Brian Robinson, it's hard to get on the field, man, especially at Alabama. And when you're talking about the level of competition you're dealing with in those backfields, that's something that is going to drive a player like a Jerome Ford to transfer and look for opportunities elsewhere. And I think he did capitalize on that opportunity. He played very well in this 4th season here as a college football player, a senior at Cincinnati. 5'11", 220, ran a 4.46 40-yard dash. So you've got some things to work with here. That's definitely the case. He's a fairly decent pass catcher out of the backfield as well. Again, not someone that you look at as a complete game changer at that spot. I wouldn't say there's really too many names in this draft class that are overly elite pass catchers of the football, but there are players who do have it as a part of their skill sets. I think you've got a lot to work with here, though, is the point with Jerome Ford. And what it's going to come down to, like basically all of these players, is how much draft capital will a team invest into Jerome Ford? What situation is he going to land in? Obviously, talking about the running back position here, you do have a position group with lower shelf life. And that's going to be something where you need that situation to look a little bit more favorable, maybe a little bit closer to right off the bat than, say, a wide receiver that you can get 8 to 10 years of shelf life out of if you find a truly quality talent at that position. So Jerome Ford, again, I have my questions, but there is a lot to like in terms of the profile he brings to the table. That brings us to James Cook at the number 9 position here. If you're enjoying today's video, please drop down and leave a like so that others can find my content and we can join this SFS community. Remember, if you're looking to join one of those future mock drafts, head down into the description of today's episode and find that Discord invite link. Again, that is where I'll be posting, as well as my Twitter at Fantasy Sizzle, or the link to my Twitter account is in the description as well. I'll be tweeting out those invite links there as well. So James Cook is my number 9 player here at 5'11", 190. That is where the question marks begin. Now, obviously, everyone and their brother wants to make the comparison between him and his brother Dalvin, and that's the intrigue here. You see a player like Dalvin Cook, who right now is hovering in redraft leagues between being a top 2 to 4 running back prospect, depending on who you ask. Obviously, with some opinions varying, I'd say that Jonathan Taylor right now is the consensus RB1 for 2022 fantasy football. But you've got everyone making the sibling comparison here because they have the same last name, because of the fact that they kind of look similar, to be honest, and they have very similar play styles. Everyone wants James Cook to be Dalvin Cook, but I think that those are very lofty expectations. And when you look at a player who's nearly 6 feet tall that weighs 10 pounds under 200, so you're talking about a player in the sub 200-pound weight category, That brings about major question marks as to, can you truly be a workhorse running back at the next level, and are you a 3-down player? And James Cook isn't someone that's shown me a ton in the receiving game. Again, like a lot of players in the list, he can get the job done, but he's not necessarily someone that excels in the receiving phase of the game. So there are things to like in the open field. You see that Dalvin Cook level electricity, that speed, that burst, that explosion that you're looking for in a running back, that home run hitting speed, obviously, that we would all love to have. But again, I don't see a world where James Cook is able to realize that Dalvin Cook level potential and ceiling, upside, whatever you want to call it. I think that those are just really lofty expectations in hopes to put on a player who hasn't really necessarily been able to take command and control entirely of this Georgia backfield. I mean, obviously Zamir White was there as well, but you never really saw either of those players, for that matter, cut entirely loose to produce on their own. And at number 10 here, the last player we're going to talk about in today's episode is by far the biggest disappointment for me. This is a player who I had as my number 4 running back overall prior to the NFL Combine. And the 40-yard dash really stunk things up for me. When you're talking about a player who I was overvaluing Kyren Williams. I will be really straight up about that, for the simple fact that I loved the receiving ability he brought to the table, and he was a very, very smooth rushing threat. So I thought you put those two skills together and you've got yourself a really nice PPR prospect. But I think the fact that you're 5'9", 198 pounds, so already kind of pushing the meter there in terms of the threshold for that 200-pound weight marker. Can he be a 3-down player? Can he not? And already we were kind of assuming that was probably not going to be the case. You're not going to have an abundance of opportunities on the goal line when you're an undersized back. That's just how the National Football League works. You're seeing very few players. I mean, your smallest guys getting opportunities on the goal line are your Christian McCaffreys of the world and your Aaron Joneses, who are just doing things at a different level than other NFL players. So it's not necessarily the norm to see a 5'9" running back who weighs less than 200 pounds, again, getting a lot of opportunities in that area of the field. And he comes out and runs a 4.65 40-yard dash. That level of explosiveness is going to minimize explosive runs. It's going to limit the ceiling that he has to create big plays. If you sit down and think about it for a second, how many running backs in the National Football League are we talking about that run a near 4.7 40-yard dash that are giving us elite fantasy numbers? The only one that comes to mind that's been super productive over the last span of games, not even an entire season, not even multiple seasons, but had a handful of productive games to end the year, was Josh Jacobs. And he ran a 4.7 40-yard dash, obviously ended things off really strong, had a good postseason run against Cincinnati, and had a really nice rushing performance against the Chargers. But Josh Jacobs has certainly not been a top 5, 7, or even 10 running back overall on a week-to-week basis throughout his career, because he's had limitations, whether that be the pass-catching game, the lack of explosive rushes of 20 or more yards. And the other guy that comes to mind is James Robinson, who is a steady Eddie. Obviously had a devastating injury to end this season, but you see the limitations there. You see where you're already having a limited amount of production. And the next name you can kind of start to draw that comparison between is a guy like a Devin Singletary, who's another undersized running back for the Buffalo Bills that's getting opportunities to catch passes out of the backfield, but he's still someone, despite the fact that he kind of saw a peak in his overall productivity to this point in his career at the end of this past season, he's still not giving you great levels of production and success at this level because of those limitations in size and speed. And what comes along with that. The fact that you're not going to get a 3-down role, you're going to have to share touches with other backfield mates, and it's just going to present a variety of opportunities. So you're going to really need Kyren Williams to be an active and involved pass-catching threat from day one to be relevant as maybe a second flex option in full PPR leagues. I just see this being a harder and harder shot for a guy who I was so excited about after watching his tape at Notre Dame. It's an upward climb from here, and it's going to be a tough road for Kyren Williams to follow in order to find that success at the next level. So those are my top 10 running backs, you guys, for today's episode. Again, updated post-NFL Combine. I will be having at least one more episode come out this week. So again, click that bell and click the subscribe button if you're around here so you're not late for that episode. You can check that out right away. That's probably going to be my updated top 10 or 12 wide receivers post NFL Combine. Also, one more time, go check out the SFS Community Discord server to get involved with those mock drafts. I would love to start doing those as soon as next week. And obviously you can be featured here on the channel and again, be involved in those mocks if you're able to join those up quickly. Also check us out on social media. In particular, we're looking to grow our Twitter community and platform up at Fantasy Sizzle. The link is also in the description of today's episode. So thank you guys so much for stopping by today. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like before you head on out, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.